All right, good evening, everyone. It is a special evening here, and I will be chatting with Mr. Jimmy Bristol, very informed lawyer, and he'll be telling us a lot more about the Constitution this evening. And I just want to welcome you all. Welcome to all our viewers online. Welcome to our live studio audience. We want to welcome you to Constitution Night Series, and this is being sponsored by Grenada Credit Unions. This evening, we are elated to have with us Mr. James Bristol, and of course he is one of His Majesty's Council, King's Council rather, who will be our featured speaker and of course facilitator for this evening's broadcast and lecture, very important lecture as a matter of fact. Now, constitutions are at the intersection of the legal systems, the political systems, and society. And of course, as tourism, it should be everybody's business, right? In the legal system, that is the justice system, it is the foundation of legal systems and citizens' rights. At the political level, it is the power map of institutions of governance. And of course, at the social level, it is cultural and should reflect and influence our shared values and principles. Now, I want to introduce our speaker this evening, and he goes by the name James A.L. Bristol, KC. And of course, that means member of His Majesty's one of His Majesty's King's Council. Yes, I want to get that right. Now, with a background in aircraft engineering, James, or Jimmy as he is popularly known, has brought a practical approach to his legal practice, not only in problem solving, but in all aspects of facilitating his clients' needs in providing timely, workable, and cost-effective results. James has successfully negotiated investment agreements with governments throughout the Eastern Caribbean and has been a leading team member on property acquisitions, business mergers, financing transactions in the region, resulting in mega success for all his clients. His philosophy of quality, not quantity, with integrity has been applied not only in the legal profession, but in other spheres of activity. He and his team successfully developed Grenada's sailing festival into one of the top 5 regattas in the Caribbean, notwithstanding that it was a boutique event of relatively small size, introducing the American's Cup champion sailors to Grenada, the top yachting magazines in the world, and attracting Hello magazine from England to be part of this event. And just a little bit more about Mr. Bristol. He has done quite a lot for Grenada, and in fact, he received his legal education in England and was called to the Bar of England and Wales in 1989. He joined the firm in 1990 and was appointed one of Her Majesty's Council on the 1st of February 2021. He is qualified as a mediator through the Center for Dispute Resolution in England. He practices mainly in the area of commercial law, including banking, corporate law, and civil litigation, taking cases up to Grenada's final court of appeal, the Privy Council in London. As a way of giving back to the profession, Mr. Bristol has been honored to act as a judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, served as Attorney General of Grenada from 2008 to 2009, and as President of the Grenada Bar Association for several terms. And finally, Mr. Bristol has been admitted to the bars of Antigua, Barbados, England and Wales, Grenada, and St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, and currently practices in Antigua, Grenada, and St. Lucia. So quite a bit of accomplishments for Mr. James Bristol, and this evening I am happy to introduce him as our speaker. And of course, we would like to encourage you to share the live. This is a very important discussion. Again, it's Constitution Night, sponsored by Grenada Credit Union Leagues. So welcome, Mr. Bristol, and congratulations on all these accomplishments. I feel honored to be in your presence this evening. So the floor is yours. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be invited by the Credit Union League to make this presentation, and as a public service, really, to enhance the understanding of the Constitution. I mean, I didn't study constitutional law because in England there's no written constitution. I started to learn about it bit by bit when I came back here. And I'm not an expert by any means, and I don't profess to be one, but I have the ability to analyze. I've done many cases, and what I would like to do is have an engaged evening where it's not me preaching, but where we discuss between ourselves the construct of the Constitution, and this evening's topic is Parliament. So what I have done is I've circulated a little guide for tonight, and I hope everyone's received it, because it's helpful to follow along with that as we go along. You know, we're not going to look verbatim at what's there, but we're just going to understand the basics. So without further ado, what I've done is, with the permission of the author, because the author is allowed in his publication use of the document which he has produced once he's acknowledged as the author. Well, it's all there because it's in its entirety, but I thought it easier to simply adopt and utilize his description of what is a constitution, and is by Elliot Bulmer, and that is at pages 2 to 29 of the PDF document, and at page 6 we have the fundamentals of a constitution. And just to explain, so we understand what is a constitution, because many of us just don't know what it is. What's a shorthand description? And he says that the vast majority, and I agree with this, of contemporary constitutions describe the basic principles of state, the structures and processes of government, and the fundamental rights of citizens in a higher law that cannot be unilaterally changed by an ordinary legislative act. This higher law is usually referred to as a constitution. And at page 7, the functions of the Constitution are set out there. It can declare and define the boundaries of the political community, declare and define the nature and authority of the political community, identify the values of a national community, and that will be in our Bill of Rights, declare and define the rights and duties of citizens, establish and regulate political institutions, and when the questions come, we go through those. But we want to deal with Parliament, which are the one institution that we're dealing with today. And sharing power between different layers of government. It says in this one, declare the official religious identity, but we don't have that. And they can commit to particular social, economic, or development goals. We don't have that in ours. But nevertheless, that's just a shorthand of what constitutions do. So it really sets up the framework for the functioning of a country. The government, which consists of Parliament, the executive meets cabinet, and the judiciary, the courts. And those are the three arms of government. And then the Bill of Rights, so your human rights are there entrenched as against the state. And then you have the public service, you have about elections, you have about citizenship. Everything is in the Constitution. And you have a popular one, which we'll come to at some point, states of emergency, because we all went through that. And I have a lot to say about that. So without further ado, I look at the Parliament, and please, if anyone's online and who's ever monitoring, they stop me and ask a question. I'm quite happy, because I want it to be interactive. The Constitution in the little handout is at pages 88 to 156, because there's an index on the front page. Now, to understand Parliament, it's necessary, in my view, to first understand the arms of government. So, as I said earlier, you have the executive, that means cabinet. That's the body of people who make the policy. Then parliament is a second organ, and they take that policy and make it law. And the judiciary, the courts, the judges, they interpret that law. And what is important is that in our model of constitution, the three arms of government are supposed to be independent. Now, that's not really so, because cabinet members may be elected members of parliament, MPs, and they therefore sit in parliament. So parliament has an overlap with the executive. But the check and balance is that the parliament, and I'll come to that, has two houses, the Senate, the upper house, and the lower house. Now, the judiciary is where you get the checks on the power of government by scrutinizing legislature and executive decision making in an independent way. So that we must understand that there are three organs of government, and they're supposed to be independent. But apart from the judiciary, there's overlap with the executive and parliament, because members of the executive sit in parliament. So the parliament is at pages 105 to 124, the composition of parliament, which is in chapter 3 of the Constitution. And you have the Senate, and I'm not going to go into too much about it, but I would invite questions. And then you have the lower house, the House of Representatives, and that's at section 29 of the Constitution. And the Senate starts at section 24. And the idea of the Senate, it consists of not elected members like the House of Representatives, but by people who are appointed either by the Governor General or by the government itself, and others from the opposition and other interest groups trying to get a balance. Okay? So that's the composition of Parliament. And we then have to look at the powers of Parliament and how Parliament operates. But before we get there, I would like to just take a pause and ask, is anyone who up to now wants to ask a question about the Constitution, what it means, and then the structure of Parliament and the three organs of government? Otherwise, I'll just be going along and we'll be finished in 20 minutes. Do we have any questions on the virtual audience? Okay. So, I'm going to skip the order of play and go to number 4, which I should have put before, but just to stress that the Constitution is the supreme law as set out in section 106, and that's at page 149 of the handout. Section 106, I'll just read it, says that this Constitution is the supreme law of Grenada and subject to the provisions of the Constitution. If any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution, the Constitution shall prevail, and the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. So the Constitution rules, subject there are exceptions, because there's no, life is not rigid, and there are exceptions. And we'll see that when we look at the Bill of Rights on Wednesday. Okay? In fact, we will see some of the exceptions this evening as well. But there are always exceptions. No right is absolute, because, you know, one man's right is another man's obligation. So there has to be give and take, and that's the Constitution is a flexible, living instrument, and it is it's got to work with society, and it develops and evolves through interpretation and application by the courts as we go along. It just doesn't stand still. And as the society evolves, the Constitution, although the written word doesn't change, but the interpretation of the Constitution by the courts also evolves to give effect to the societal changes and apply it to current social conditions, yeah, and what has become the new social norms in society. Okay.
A quick question before we move on. Who has access to the Constitution? Can anybody just access the Constitution? Anybody?
Yes. The first, the laws of Grenada are they're online, and if we had a library, I don't think, they should be there, available to everybody. There's not a hidden document, and the Constitution is within our laws, fortunately, you can just Google Grenada Constitution, and it'll come up. Yeah, and I think really every school library, if we have school libraries, I really don't know, everything's sort of fallen by the wayside, should have not a copy but copies. Every school should have copies of the laws, and encourage the students to just look, have a glimpse and see what's in there, especially the Constitution.
If I may interject here, we have somebody online. They're asking for the preamble of the Grenada Constitution so that they can at least put into perspective the discussion that we are having today, at least to understand the fundamental principles.
Well, the preamble is just that. It's not binding. The preamble is a list of desires and goals and objectives. So it's to be found in the handout and at the beginning of the Constitution. So it's really a statement of the ideals to which the Constitution is framed and drafted to uphold. Unfortunately, while the Constitution may be drafted to uphold principles, in practice, I don't think we as citizens or we as individuals actually give effect to the preamble. And I'll just give you an example. Whereas the people of Grenada have affirmed that their nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the fatherhood and supremacy of God. Stop there. How many? The supremacy of God. As I said, if Jesus went in Prince Charles's coach instead of Prince Charles, nobody would have turned up for the function. And man's duties towards his fellow man. And look at how we behave to each other. Lack of respect, impolite, failing to respect other people's property and rights. So we as individuals don't give effect to the preamble of the Constitution.
And also, you mentioned, as you mentioned that, I was thinking, are there any plans to review the Constitution? You talked about societal. Yes, I know you're laughing. I know this one is a big one. Plans to renew as the society changes. We had a conversation before we started this live, about the society is changing all the time. So, what's happening to this document?
As I said, the Constitution is a living instrument. It is not cast in stone. The courts give effect to the changing societal norms. However, I think there's a need to amend the Constitution, but in a wholehearted way, not a piecemeal picking at bits. I think we need to see if that model really works for us. What is called the Westminster model, which is how in England, Westminster is where the government sits in the House of Parliament. If that system suits our society, these are things that have been canvassed, and whether we need more checks and balances set out in there because of the abuse of power that we've seen in countries with this type of constitution, because you know, if somebody doesn't want to respect it, how often do you find that there's a recourse? For example, and we'll deal with this on the Bill of Rights, but as somebody's raised it, right to protection of property under the Bill of Rights, your property is yours. The government just can't take it unless there's a law that allows for the acquisition of property for a public purpose. And that law must provide for the prompt payment of full compensation. I understand, and I think it may still be live, but the original owners of Hog Island, that was acquired under the Gary regime, probably in the early 70s, maybe, you know. I don't think they ever got paid. There's still people with land at Point Selena was acquired for the airport who haven't been paid. I know that. So, you know, how many people have the financial wherewithal to fight these things in court, and they just get sidelined and marginalized? So we need to strengthen those things, because a lot of times the powers that be do not adhere, notwithstanding the Constitution is there, they don't adhere to it, knowing, I think, that they can get away with it.
We have a question from one of our audience members.
The point I would like to raise, you mentioned that the Constitution is flexible and living. I am thinking, and I may be very wrong, so you're here to correct me, the fact that it's living and flexible, that could probably work for it as well as against it. I don't know, I'm just asking.
The fact that it's living.
Well, the fact that it's living works for it, because it means that the way it's interpreted is adjusted, because the situation in society that pertained in 1974, when we obtained, I wouldn't call it independence, that's not a good word, political self-government. The world has changed a lot since 1974. For example, I'll give you a simple example, the concept of property. The protection of property. We think of property as being land, but the concept of property is anything. It is a book, it's money, it's
Ownership of anything.
Ownership of anything that can be owned, because property is a broad concept in law. It means anything that we own. There's tangible property that you can touch and feel, and there's intangible property which you can't. For example, the money in a bank is a debt owed by the bank to you, right? You don't actually have money in the bank, because your dollar, the same dollar with the same number, doesn't sit there and say that's yours. It's a debt from the bank to you. So that's your property. The right to that money is your property, and the government can't then go and access your account and take it. Yeah, you understand? The way it's been applied, and there are lots of other rights. I don't think we have a right to privacy in our Constitution, but those rights in similar constitutions have been explained what it means. I'll give you an example, and this is going to overlap with Wednesday. The freedom of movement in the Bill of Rights, right? Fundamental rights and freedoms. And I think this is good because it's practical. I have researched, because I had issues and I had to do the research with immigration. And one of the things is the authorities, not just Grenada, but generally like to say that the passport belongs to the government and they can take it. Well, that's absolutely not so. The passport belongs to the holder. And the reason for that is the courts have said that part and parcel of your freedom of movement is having a passport, because you can't move without it. You understand? You see how the flexibility? So next time they tell you they want a passport, tell them you're not giving them. All right?
Mr. Bristol, there is a comment online, right, about owning, why people can't respect other people's property, right? I recently, and I think this is gonna go in line with what I'm gonna ask right now. I recently heard of a situation where a homeowner is erected the right word, but he put up a camera, and it is it is pointing towards his neighbor's property. And we're talking about ownership, we're talking about privacy here. How does that infringe, or well, it's too quiet. How does that infringe on one's privacy? The fact that he owns this camera, he put it up in his property, but it's infringing on his neighbor's property. And also, how does that relate to the Constitution?
Well, it doesn't relate to the Constitution because the Bill of Rights is the citizen or members of the community against the state. That's a private issue.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a private issue. Okay?
Okay.
So in certain constitutions where you have a right to privacy, means the government cannot invade your right by tapping your phone and things like
So
that.
it only relates to government and citizens.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is
State.
so
It's the state and
state
the citizen.
versus man.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. I think we have another question.
I have a question here. In terms of making changes to the Constitution, what are the processes to achieve changes in the Constitution? Because I believe we have attempted that before, and that might have failed. So, and is it too draconian in terms of what the expectation is to realize the intended changes?
No. Well, we tried 2 referenda before, but that's the process. And the reason that process is there is because you are trying to protect the Constitution from being interfered with and tampered to the detriment of the citizen, our citizens. And there's a reason it's there. And that was borne out by the referenda, because what was proposed, it obviously didn't sit well with the people. I mean, you had a government that was just won several elections, hands down. They had no opposition. Yet, when it came to interfering with people's rights, their very own supporters said, no, we don't want that, because it didn't look right. So if you're doing things right, I'm sure it'll succeed, and I think we need to make some changes. But that is the procedure, okay? And it's set out in the Constitution in Section 39. These rights, and there are many parts of the Constitution, not just the Bill of Rights, which are what we call entrenched. And that means it could only be altered by having a referendum, okay? Appeals to the Privy Council is one, Bill of Rights, etc. There's several
Someone
areas.
is also suggesting that maybe it's because we don't understand the Constitution in full detail. That's why some of these the referendum was one thing that maybe failed, because we didn't understand it. The regular man, the common man, did not fully understand what was being presented. Do you think that's the case?
No, I think the people fully well understood. That's why it failed, and not the other way about, because the people who didn't understand it were the people who were the protagonists for change. They didn't understand the Constitution, and or they didn't want to understand the Constitution, and were seeking to undermine, in my opinion,
Right.
the protections afforded to us all under that document.
And I think that's why it's so important, these conversations, that we're having today, and it's important for the Constitution to be taught and presented in schools, and even in regular forums. It shouldn't just be, hidden in a book or stuck online, it should be made more available to all who is concerned.
But you see, if we paid heed to the preamble, right? If we paid heed to the preamble, number D, whereas the people of Grenada express their respect for the rule of law, and since moral conduct constitute the noblest flowering of their culture and their plural heritage, regard it as the duty of every man always to hold it in high respect. The rule of law. So I will give you all a very topical example. where I think I raised it, but I decided not to do anything about it because it made no sense. About the knowing your constitution, knowing your rights. I'm a firm believer in educating people to know their rights because there is a lot of advantage being taken. I've seen it every day, okay? Of, look at the pensions, you know, that's a constitutional right, and it took how many years, yeah, to finally get that through, despite many court rulings. There are two things, and we seem to have slipped into the Bill of Rights, but I'm going to come back to Parliament, and we could just carry on the conversation on Wednesday because you know it's such an interesting topic. But while we're at it, right? Because we're having a chat.
Up, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to do two things. One, remind me COVID, and two, my pet peeve. I mentioned the passport, right? Two lawyers in Grenada. The late Derek Knight, Queen's Counsel, because he died before he became King's Counsel, and myself, at that time I was ordinary counsel, took the government to court on separate occasions about, and this is freedom of movement. Now, freedom of movement is Section 12 of the Constitution in the Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. Okay? Now listen to this. No person shall be deprived of his freedom of movement, that is to say, the right to move freely throughout Grenada, the right to reside in any part of Grenada, the right to enter Grenada, and the right to leave Grenada, and immunity from expulsion from Grenada. Let's take a pin. I have 3 examples. The other one just came up. If I have 4, I'm going to take the first one, immigration. So they tell everybody, Grenadian, where your form? You fill out the form? We have 2 cases. One says there's no requirement to have the form. That was the Derek Knight case. My case was it's unconstitutional. They cannot make your condition of entry into your home subject to form filling and including the departure from Grenada.
Thank you.
Right? That has been declared, but they still insist. It's only me, you know. Oh, Bristol, let him through. Right? I'm the only one who stands up for it because if you don't take care of the small things, then the big things are going to come tumbling down on you and you're going to say, well, what happened? We didn't see this coming.
I had an issue with that very same thing coming in from a Caribbean nation recently.
Right. Not only that, and I just flew in Saturday. They're still insisting Grenadians fill the form. Hold on. Well, these people don't know because they don't know the Constitution and they're not aware. It's not their fault. This is why we need education. You think it's a small point? It's a very big point because it shows the respect for the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary to interpret and apply the law and say, what the judiciary has ruled, you must obey. They didn't obey the pension rulings. They're still not obeying. But now this administration has thankfully honored the pensions and so forth. But for years, it was you know, we won with my dad, won the first big case way back in 90-something. I can't remember when. No. I came in Saturday and they're telling people, you know how to put your phone number on the form. No, there is no, assuming you have to fill in the form. This is assume. There is nowhere in the immigration laws of Grenada, because the immigration form, that you have to give your phone number. That is a private thing. Right? You know? But they make up this story. Right? So that's one thing. So citizens, don't fill in the form. I know hilarious part is, so the form is a duplicate, so I don't fill in the front. But the back now is customs. Now the customs form is approximate to what is prescribed in the law, which is exactly that. No more information. Yeah, how many pieces, tick, tick, $10,000, whatever declares. And they say, well, you didn't fill in the next side. I said, but that's immigration. And they said, no, you had to fill in. I said, no. I'm a Grenadian. Immigration sent me through with a blank one. I don't have to fill it in. So and big hoo-ha the other day at the airport, and so forth. But
They
of
say
course,
Jimmy giving trouble.
no, I went into my briefcase and I pulled out the actual law. I said, may I please access my briefcase and I'll show you the law, which I did. And I said, I'll lend it to you, right? You can go and photocopy it and tell me where it say I have to put my name, address, where I live, thing, and all of the stuff on the immigration form, you know?
So you could have left that area in 5 minutes, but you ended up staying.
It was quite a while, and
I wanna fulfill one of the requests on the live. You know, there's a question referring back to the issue of privacy. The newly installed traffic lights by the government of Grenada have been said to have security cameras. I don't know if that is true. Could this be in any way be considered to be an infringement of all rights to privacy? You said state and right. So this is owned by the government, right? Could this be infringement? Let me read the question. Infringement on our rights to privacy. The rationale being that the state is recording citizens not just as they're driving, but as they walk on the street.
Well, I say we don't have a right to privacy in the Constitution, in the fundamental rights and freedoms, but we may have to ask the courts to interpret what is meant by that, because it may be a form of arbitrary search, because they're searching you via the camera. It may be affecting your freedom of movement. Mm-hmm. It may be affecting your freedom of assembly, because they're spying on you.
Right.
No, not every. You see, there's nothing in the law. As I said, the fundamental rights are not absolute. They're subject to exceptions, but the exceptions must be contained in a law. Where, for example, you can be arrested. That interferes with your liberty on suspicion of an offense. That's not unconstitutional. All right? Once the law is a law that's reasonably required, that's what it says generally in a democratic society. So in other words, the law must have a legitimate aim, and the method employed must be proportionate to the achievement of that aim. That's how they do it. So I know there's no law about cameras spying on people at the traffic light junction. So it may very well be an infringement, if we can stretch it. And given that there's no law, then the exceptions in the Constitution do not apply. So it's something to be tested, but it is probably they have cameras just make sure people are stopping and obeying the lights, right? And but you need to legislate.
Yeah.
If it's using for and the data is controlled and it's being used for that purpose, I say fair enough. But there must be legislation.
Nice. We do have a question from one of our audience members.
Thanks and good evening. A comment and find my way to a question thereafter. Now, it's one of those things that I think is very unfortunate about our Grenadian circumstances. So you identified 3 players in relation to the Constitution. And it was very significant that you identified the society. So the legislature is there, the politicians sit there and they pass laws. And then the judiciary is there and they know what they must do. And they do what they must do. The breakdown, in my view, in fact, a significant breakdown, arises from the fact that the Grenadian society has not engaged the Constitution of Grenada from the perspective of educating themselves, to try to understand. But that is linked with the fact that we don't have a tradition of informal education. So there's no exam to pass at CXC for knowing your Constitution, so nobody teaches it at its schools. So, and yet a lot of this thing is not, well, let me put it this way. So a lot of us have grown up thinking that this Constitution is just for lawyers and judges. And we don't understand it really is for us. So that's a big point that you have made, and I trust that as we go along, we're going to get there to open up that box so that people see themselves in the Constitution and see how, in fact, they can contribute to the evolution of that Constitution. So that's my comment. So let me get to my question, which hopefully will take us back to Parliament, where you started. So initially, you talked about at least you introduced it, the composition of the Parliament. And I know you would have been minded to get to the purpose of the Constitution, which is to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Grenada. So I would like you to get there and to comment for our understanding on what is meant by that. Making laws for the peace, order, and good government. And I would underline good government and invite you to share your views on that concept that is described in the Constitution as good government. Thank you.
Well, I think that means good governance, because no one can guarantee good government. You know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So it is so that we have a structured system of rules and regulations, so we have an orderly and ordered society, so things work. I think that's what it means. But no one can guarantee a good government. You could put as many words as you want, and
no, but sorry, Jimmy, sorry. It's not. It's common G. The concept of government, common G.
I agree, but that's the same thing. It's governance. Government, in that context, in my view, is the concept of governing a country, which is governance. So good government means running the place properly according to the rules and regulations and respect for the Constitution. But you don't get that. And you the only way you can write a tightest Constitution unless you have recourse to the courts and effective enforcement, it won't work. I'll give you an example. I was doing a case, we got a judgment against the government some years ago, lots of money. And they didn't want to pay. You know, they tried to pappy show the people. And I had to take enforcement proceedings. And it was unique because the government was trying to hide and say, it's not me, it's not the PS to pay, it's the minister, and all kind of rigmarole. And it was shielding behind the Crown Proceedings Act, Section 21(4), which says you cannot enforce against the government. And I challenge that as being unconstitutional because it does not respect the fundamental right to a fair trial in Section 8(8) of the Constitution. Because a fair trial, and that's all aspects of a trial, constitute a fair trial, including the enforcement of your judgment. Because if you win your case, you have a nice judge, you have nice witnesses, everybody, la la la, and you get a judgment, you can't enforce it. What's the point of the trial? So the courts have extended that to include, that's the flexible constitution that grows, the enforcement of the judgment. And I actually got a judgment here, which was one on that point, but it was overturned by the Court of Appeal on a different point, okay, on a technical point. So the matter is still up for determination. But I was encouraged that the authorities which I found, and some of them from South Africa, which has a similar constitution, really, and Canada, and the US actually, the thinking is that these concepts, because this law is something we inherited from the British, they never had a written constitution, they still don't have, of the crown or the government not being susceptible to having its land taken or the prime minister's car seized because the judgment debt is owing. That is archaic and that doesn't sit with the Constitution. Okay? So we need effective mechanisms. We need real enforcement mechanisms. We need real accountability. And that, to clarify, that in any constitutional reform, in my view, should be within the Constitution of the right to levy against government. That's something I would advocate for, because otherwise they just act with impunity and tell you, tough, we're not paying you, take us to court, and know you don't have the money, or you get frustrated, you see? So, good governance.
Thanks. There is a question on the live broadcast to explain preamble F. Maybe you've done that one. I can't recall you doing that one. F.
All right, well, let's look at it. Whereas the people of Grenada desire that their constitution should reflect the above-mentioned principles and beliefs, which represent those high ideals upon which their nation is founded, and make provision for ensuring the protection in Grenada of fundamental rights and freedoms. Well, that's the last one, so that is read in context of everything that went before, saying, look, we desire that those aforementioned or above-mentioned principles reflect the high ideals upon which this nation is founded, and we should those are reflected in the fundamental rights and freedoms in the Constitution. So that's and the preamble is not binding; it's just a statement of ideals. But it's a good guide, and as Mr. Joseph said, if we have an education, you have to begin in schools. Not only would we be aware of our rights, but we will also be aware of our obligations. And I think it will bring a sea change in our behavior.
Correct.
And and all the lack of respect that we show to each other will evaporate, because we realize that we have to give to get.
So it's not just claiming, I know my rights, but it's also
No, it's not like
being-
begging for reparations
Yeah.
when our own governments have us in economic slavery and servitude
for years.
for years.
Now, I want to, I feel we're going around and, we're talking about a lot of things. And I know we want to talk today. We were specifically supposed to be talking about Parliament, but we're going to the Bill of Rights, which is fine too. And I think this is just an excellent conversation. We do have another question from one of our audience members who will entertain that question at this moment.
Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Now, I observe that within relatively recent times, we are discussing what is supposed to be the difference between sex and gender. I have not seen anything about gender in the Constitution. Does that mean that if we in Grenada start recognizing officially and legally the concept of gender, that we are moving into an unconstitutional area?
That's an excellent question.
Well, the Constitution speaks to laws discriminating, and in 13, let's see what 13 says. Subject to the provisions of 4, 5, and 7 of this section, no law shall make any provision that is discriminatory either of itself or in its effect. So, if the government passes laws, or it may be, fails to pass laws, then that may be discriminatory. But it says you may not pass a law. But also, it also says in the you have freedom of conscience, freedom of well, I think it's freedom of conscience, but the way you express yourself, well, it's not really a freedom of conscience. I think it really comes under discrimination. We will be discriminating against certain people, and for example, the criminalization of sexual relations between consenting male adults is still on the books, and that is an anachronism, and I think that should go. And I know it's been challenged in other islands successfully. So that they as they say, the Constitution is living, and the interpretation is being applied newly every day as the circumstances change. Yeah.
And society is changing as
Yeah,
well.
and the good thing, sir, that you mentioned that, because I got a form from the government the other day that changed the Companies Act, and you have to know where becoming a director of a company, you have to sign saying I consent, and it says on the form, sex, male or female. I mean, in 2023, that's a new amendment, or 2022, to put in such a thing, because if you're not, it's not sex. I think it's gender, and is it male or female is such a dated concept, and the drafts person didn't really think about it, because somebody may leave it blank and then tell you, well, you can't register as a director because you haven't put it in. Say, well, I'm neither. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we have to think about these things. I think you're right. We have to think about them. I haven't given it much thought other than that, but I confess. But it's something that we have to think about. Yeah.
And on that question, so how do we, because sometimes it would seem that some lines are getting blurred based on how we interpret the law. So where does the line draw? If I can say that I don't identify as this, I identify as that, because that can just go on and on and on. I'm not a man, I'm not a female, I'm something else, or I am not part of a particular, I just don't identify as this being wrong, so I'm just going to do what I feel like. So where do we draw the line? How do we get something definitive if it is up to one's interpretation?
Well, there's nothing to interpret right now because we have no laws, but the government needs to address these issues. Because you have, for example, male and female toilet facilities in a public place. Where does someone who was birth gender was male is now female? Should that person go into the female bathrooms? That's a big topic globally. And the reason it's a big topic is because many perverts have been saying that they're transitioned female from male to go and commit crimes in the female toilets that they had previously been convicted for as a male. So, it's a serious matter. You have to think about these things. And you also have to think about accommodating people who have, as the word is, transition. You have to accommodate them. And you may need to have separate facilities for those people. Maybe they might, I don't know what the views are. I mean, it's not something that I've engaged with, but maybe the solution is just that, so you don't have any blurring,
Can you, I want to move back to our topic at hand, the Parliament. We talked about the preamble. What other parts does the Constitution entail?
I want to let's get
If I
on
should
to
call it parts.
let's get on to the Parliament. I mentioned that the Constitution is supreme law. So Parliament has to its powers are circumscribed to the extent, far from its procedure, apart from that, as to what laws it may pass. They have to conform with the Constitution. Now, I'm going to give you some interesting cases because this is practical, because it happens to us every day. I get a duty free. Come and give me a letter.
Duty free concessions.
Concession, I get a letter. I'll bring in the car, I get 50%. You get a letter? Yeah, you get a letter. Come down, and then we'll get the car and we'll do that. No. That is so unconstitutional, it isn't funny. The Parliament, under sections 30, money bills. Let me find it.
That's an interesting one because we know that the Office of Creative Affairs, I believe, they're giving duty-free concessions to creatives. And I mean, don't tell me it's unconstitutional because I fall under that bracket. Next thing I want to bring in a camera to film a movie. You're telling me that
The-
that's unconstitutional?
Well, I don't know what legislative framework they're acting under, but just to say, from sections 45, 46, and 45 and 46, money bills, taxation is the prerogative and purview of Parliament. And under 46, the remission of a tax, the waiving, if you have a tax obligation, and only Parliament can remit it, right? So you don't have to pay it. So it's Parliament. Now, Parliament could do it by passing a law that allows for a remission of a tax.
Okay.
And that law will normally say that you pass a regulation and define the circumstances when that remission may take place. I'll give you an example because I have it here. Okay? And it's a case from Belize, Caribbean Court of Justice. And that's at page 46. So let me go to page 46 and see if I find. Page 46. Oh. All right. Page 46. Now, oh, where's the case? Oh, it's not coming up. Hang on. No, something's going wrong here. Let me just reload this. It's the Belize case, which is at page. All right, let me go to page 46 of the handout. I want to read this to you. I'll have to stroll through. Page 46.
And while we're waiting, just to remind our online listeners, we are back on Wednesday. We'll be discussing more of the Grenada's Constitution. And on Wednesday, we want to touch on the Bill of Rights. Today, we're talking about Parliament. We're explaining Parliament. Our guest this evening, Mr. James, popularly known as Jimmy. You know, I feel a little odd calling him Jimmy. You know, so Mr. Bristol, James Bristol. And we're looking for an example, the Belize case.
Yeah, at page 48 of the handout, this case concerned the government making an agreement with an investor to give them concessions, far-reaching concessions, very broad, and it was challenged by a successor government, and the CCJ held that the minister couldn't make an agreement to give away the government money because Parliament, like I just read under 46 2 sub 4 in Grenada's constitution provides for Parliament remitting a tax. Only Parliament could do that, and it was confirmed by the CCJ in this case. Okay? And it has to do with the separation of powers because the executive cannot cross over into Parliament's powers. If Parliament wants to pass a law to remit, Parliament can pass a law to remit. Okay? And I'll give you an example. So that's what the Belize case said, among many other things, is that in Anguilla, I'll show you how it's done. Because they have a law allowing for remission of taxes, which is at page, the Anguilla laws, page 157. I don't know why this isn't working. All right. Now, at page 157, you have the Financial Administration and Audit Remission Regulations. And then you have at page 160 the Financial Administration and Audit Act. We have a similar act here. I can't remember, it's a Finance and something act. Similar wording. But in section 16, which is to be found at page I'll get section 16. Section 8. Right. At page 175 of the handout, section 16 of the Finance Administration Act of Anguilla, we have an equivalent here. It says, remission of money paid or payable. When the governor in council, that means the governor general, they have a slightly different constitution because they're still a part of England. But it means the governor general acting on the advice of cabinet. Where the governor in council is satisfied that it is in the public interest to do so, or that hardship or injustice has resulted or is likely to result, the governor in council may, by regulation applicable to a class or classes of persons, or by certificate in a specific case, remit taxes. Okay? So Parliament has given the tax remitting authority power to the Governor General in defined circumstances by what we call subsidiary legislation or subordinate legislation to remit. Because it's not taken away Parliament's powers of lawmaking and put it in the minister's hands in contravention of the separation of powers, because the parameters are closely and tightly defined, and that's permissible. Okay? In case you're wondering. So what's happening here? So let's look at the regulations. So where it's in the public interest or injustice or hardship, okay? Right. So at page, we'll go to the regulations that were passed pursuant to that section. And you'll see how it is supposed to work. It's not a letter. All right. All right. Let's get to the regulations. At page 157. Okay? It says, so what regulations do? They have to refer, they must state the source of the authority. So you have to look, the first thing you look is say, where did this authority come from to make these regulations? And I'm going to come on the COVID laws in a while, because that's when we're going to have some fun. We'll be almost due. Is it, what time we finish?
We're past the time, but the conversation is
I thought it was 7:30.
It's still happening.
I was geared up for 7:30.
I feel like you're geared up.
Because somebody
Which
said
is
that
good.
Dinner is at 7:30. Anyway, but let's just deal with this point, because it's really important to understand the limits of Parliament and the limits of the minister. You give me something, I go in. You know what I mean? That kind of way. We don't run countries like in a marketplace. We run countries on pursuant to laws and good government. Good government comes from following the procedures set out in the Constitution that govern administrative action. Okay? Otherwise, we have anarchy.
I want you to repeat that. It's a profound statement. Repeat that. Good
I
government.
forgot.
Anarchy. We don't want anarchy, so
I
we
forgot.
need to follow what's laid out
Yeah.
in the Constitution. I think that's the summary of it.
Yeah.
But you
So-
said it so well. So I'm going to go back and we're going to go back and we're
You
going to
can get
find
it,
it, and we're
right.
going to put a quote.
Okay.
You know?
So these are the Financial Administration and Audit Remission Regulations. And it says, where's they introduced VAT, right? And they didn't take off the VAT for goods already in stock on which VAT was paid. We had a similar problem here. You had an overlap. You paid VAT on you paid duties on your goods. They brought in VAT, but you had stock. And yet the VAT had to go on top of that stock when you sold it. So that it was very expensive and it caused hardship. Mm-hmm. This is what happened in Anguilla. When they brought in VAT, the equivalent of VAT, they still had taxes goods on which tax had been paid and they had not yet been sold. But when they're sold, they had a VAT on top of that tax already. So the government collecting twice, and the poor consumer is being hit hard. Now, right. Section 2. So that's the background. The Governor in Council hereby, pursuant to Section 16 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, which I just read, so pursuant to that act, remits to a GST registered business, GST is VAT, referred to the taxes paid on stock in hand. Okay? Right? So, they passed a regulation pursuant to the power to do so conferred by the authority, namely Parliament, and that is legal. That is how you do it. You don't, the minister, because you see, if you do the thing with the minister and the letter, all the friend and them go get it. And if you're not the friend, you're not going to get it.
Right.
So you create divisions in the society which breed contempt and animosity and war and thing, right? Which is, you know what, you understand? We are born peaceful, you know. I had a little grandnephew or nephew was born the other day. 1 day old and the boy smiling. Nobody telling me must smile. It's natural, right? But wait till he's 1 year old and he starts feeling the influence of society and you got a different thing. You understand? It's the same thing. If we do not treat each other right by doing what is right, we will end up doing what is wrong. And it's going to fall apart. It has fallen apart. And to pull it back in, it's difficult. Yeah? Because people have become accustomed to the wrong thing now being the norm. So the right thing is now the wrong thing. Yeah? That's like Jesus, you know, he's doing the right thing, but the wrong thing was the right thing. So they just dealt with him, right? Yeah. So that's what happens. So this is how it's done. I put it there to show us how it's done. And I just want to run to the COVID regs because that affected us all and is really important because a lot of us, the government knew what they were doing was wrong.
So we've dealt with, so that was taxing powers, and we talked about that was under taxing powers, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going back and if you're reading through the Constitution, you will understand what we just talked about with the concessions and whatnot. Those are taxing powers. Now we want to move on to our final discussion point on our list this evening: subsidiary legislation.
Right. And while we just spoke about these remission regulations in agriculture, that's subsidiary legislation because it gives the governor power to make regulations to remit the tax. So that is, it's subsidiary. It's made pursuant to a power granted by Parliament. Okay, that's what it means. It's subsidiary to Parliament's powers. Now, so that's one example. But I'd like to deal with the COVID thing because that is similarly. So as we've seen with the Anguilla laws, the exercise of the power by the governor had to reflect and say it came from Section 16, pursuant to that. And Section 16 says injustice, hardship, so forth, right? You can't, where a power is granted, you can only exercise it within those parameters that Parliament stipulates. Okay? Emergency Powers Act.
And that's
Page
a
is
big
199.
That's a big one because for 2 years we were stuck in that, right? So we're talking COVID, Emergency Powers Act.
Yeah, this thing is stuck again. But anyway, I'll just get it open. What did I say? 199? I think it's important for us to
199.
understand what was done to us and how it was hidden under the carpet.
So Emergency Powers Act, and then we have State of Emergency Proclamation, and
Right,
we're
it
talking
comes for that.
specifically
Yeah.
to COVID.
Yeah. What did I say? 199?
199.
Okay. Let's get the Emergency Powers Act. Sorry, my thing is not working so well. It's not finding the page. Okay, coming to it. So we're all aware that the state of emergency was declared COVID. All right. The question is, was that declaration of a state of emergency legal? And I'm starting up top.
Legal, or we could also say constitutional.
Yeah. Yes, because if you don't follow the procedure.
Just get to the jargon, you know.
In my opinion, I'm going to start up front. In my firmly held opinion, it was totally illegal. And every act flowing therefrom was therefore illegal. Okay? Wear masks, don't go in there. If it was done under the Quarantine Act or the Public Health Act, they have provisions for these things in quarantine. But it was done under the Emergency Powers Act. Listen to the Emergency Powers Act. And audience, read it and tell me. I'm going to ask you a question. Section 3, declaration that a state of emergency exists. If at any time it appears to the Governor General that action has been taken, you hear that? That action has been taken, or is immediately threatened by any person or body of persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the maintenance of public order or the defense of Grenada, or the maintenance of public safety or the defense of the community, or any substantial portion of the community, or any supplies or services essential to the life of the community, the Governor General may, by proclamation, which shall be published in the Gazette, declare a state of emergency, etc. What did Parliament say? The Governor General could act in these circumstances. First circumstance, action has been taken by a person or body of persons that's likely to then cause these endangerment. Which people took action in Grenada? COVID is not an action taken by anyone. COVID is just a disease or whatever it is spreading. You see the problem? So the proclamation, which is at page 205, the recitals make no mention of what is said in Section 3 of the Emergency Powers Act, quite unlike the governor in Anguilla who referred back to Section 16 of his empowering legislation. In fact, first recital, whereas there's a worldwide outbreak of COVID, that's not action by any individual or group of individuals threatening. That is to do with insurrection and gun and thing, right? COVID is highly infectious. That's not action by a group or individuals threatening anybody. The Ministry of Health confirmed COVID-19. The risk of transmission is a disease and they have to take preventative measures. That's not an action by anybody. Section 17 of the Constitution says you may declare a state of emergency, yeah. And the Prime Minister has declared a national disaster. But what that has to do with state of emergency? That has nothing to do with the state of emergency. Emergency Powers Act is the Emergency Powers Act. Don't matter anything about the National Disaster Emergency Power Act. Section 3 of the Emergency Power Act, now they come to it. So they start off with COVID because it's a COVID thing. Now, way down, they come, and whereas Section 3 of the Emergency Powers Act provides that if at any time it appears to the Governor General that action has been taken or is immediately threatened, it repeats Section 3. But everything that went before has nothing to do with any action by anybody. I therefore declare a state of an emergency. I want you, audience, to think about that. Is that declaration of a state of emergency within the powers granted by Section 3? I say not. But look at it. And you realize how we have been taken for a ride. And I'll tell you one more thing while we're at it. Section 17. Section 14. Yeah. Section 15 of the Constitution, because under a state of emergency, this is flowing from all of these things, where, so First problem is they have no right to declare state of emergency. Second problem, because fundamental rights and freedoms will be curtailed during a state of emergency, the Constitution puts certain safeguards in place. Okay? And in section 15, and that is excused by section 14 of the Constitution, which says nothing done the authority of the Emergency Powers Act is in contravention of section 3 or 13, where there's a public emergency. 3 is protection of personal liberty. 13, from discrimination of, on grounds of race, etc. Okay? So, the Constitution exempts, makes constitutional what would otherwise be unconstitutional, by saying, where's a state of emergency? You could go and take people and hold them and those sorts of things. But to counter that and to temper an abuse by the government of those wide and probably could be draconian powers, but very, very broad powers, and they could be abused. In section 15 of the Constitution, there are the safeguards, and one of them, first, you have, as soon as reasonably practicable, 15(1)(a), and not more than 7 days after his detention. So if someone, they tell you you had to go in quarantine, if it's done under the Emergency Powers Act, and assuming it was legal, I'm just saying it's not legal, but assuming it's legal, you have to, he has to be informed, a statement in writing specifying the details upon which is being held. 1, I don't know if anyone got that. 2, not more than 14 days after his detention, he had to publish it in the Gazette that he has been detained, stating the law upon which he is detained. Was that ever done? You ever see anything in the Gazette? Anybody get detained? I was representing somebody who was detained. They never got anything published in the Gazette. I've never seen any Gazette with regard to that. The most importantly, C, subsection C, not more than 1 month after the commencement of his detention, and thereafter during his detention at intervals of not more than 6 months, his case shall be reviewed by an independent and impartial tribunal established by law and presided over a person appointed by the Chief Justice from among persons who are entitled to practice as a barrister or solicitor in Grenada. And he shall have access to his lawyer and so on. Hold on. So there must be established a tribunal. This is where now you get the judiciary being the check, right? The independent judiciary. To review the detention, to prevent an arbitrary use of power, an abuse of power. Now listen to this. This tribunal was never set up. During the state of emergency. And the learning that I didn't bring it here because it's just too much, but I can tell you this. From, I think, Guyana, Court of Appeal, is that, and I think our own Court of Appeal as well, the failure to establish the tribunal upon making the declaration of the state of emergency means that any detention doesn't have the safeguard, and therefore it's unlawful and unconstitutional. Because these things have to be put in place and must be there when that person is arrested. He must have access to a review from the day you are put in detention under a state of emergency. They never did it.
And the detention here would be equivalent to the quarantine.
Well, quarantine probably is quarantine. If you break, whatever they say, whatever they use. But it was generally quarantine. No, I'm saying if it was done under the Emergency Powers Act, and the several regulations came after. If it was done under the Quarantine Act and the Public Health Act, those acts themselves permit quarantine, and they're an exception to the freedom of movement contained in the relevant section of the fundamental rights and freedoms. Okay, I'll read it to you, just so you know the difference.
And just to juke the ants nest a little further, if we go back to Hurricane Ivan, how does that?
All right. Well, I just come to that. I just draw you where the Public Health Act and probably the Quarantine Act come in. Under Section 3 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, no person shall be deprived of his personal liberty, save as may be authorized by law in any of the following cases. And G, for the purpose of preventing the spread of an infectious or contagious disease. That's an exception. But you have to use the right source of your power. Right? But I can say this. That whole emergency powers thing was a farce. Legally. Right through from the passing from the Emergency Powers Act to the Declaration and to the failure to comply with Section 15 of the Constitution.
So pretty much how it was done was the problem.
Yeah, but they knew what they were doing because I spoke with the AG at the time and they just went ahead. He didn't tell me he knew what he was doing, but I could tell that they knew what they were doing.
Thank you so much. I know we have one more question. Do we have another question?
Is redress. Now that you're saying, let's say what you're saying is in fact how those who intended or those who enforced it, it probably is not what you're saying is contrary to what they intended. Can somebody now go to the High Court or wherever it is and say, okay, at that time my right was infringed upon and I would like to seek some sort of redress for the actions that were taken against me or for what I was made to do at that time?
Absolutely. The Constitution in Section 10, where is it? Where's the I just have to find it. I want to get the right section. Judicial provisions, yeah. Section 101. Well, it's not 101. 101 allows you to go to court for infringements other than the Bill of Rights. I'm just trying to find the section. Oh, that's right in the Bill of Rights itself. If I remember correctly, I'll get it for you.
We're going to touch more on that in our next
Yeah.
broadcast.
Because I didn't come, it's in there where you have a right to go to the court for redress, and there's no time limit, there's no statute of limitations, and you can get a lot of damages,
Nice. And I mean, that's why it's so important for education.
Section 16 of the Constitution is the right to seek redress for infringement of your fundamental rights. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, you can do it.
Well, thank you so much. We have come to the end of today's discussion on the Parliament. And of course, this is Constitution Night series sponsored by Grenada Credit Unions. This is part one. This was part one. I mean, the time flew by really fast. And we thought that we weren't going to be interactive tonight because of our limited numbers. But indeed, it was a very, very fruitful and educational discussion. And I want to thank our online viewers and listeners, because some people don't always watch. They're doing things in the kitchen and they're listening in. And I want to thank our studio audience. I'm claiming this as our little studio. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to Grenada Credit Union League for putting on such a brilliant series called Constitution Night. And of course, I want to say special thank you to Mr. James Bristol. I try not to call you Jimmy, but everybody likes calling you. I think you're good with Jimmy, right? I'll still call him Mr. Bristol when I see you. But thank you so much. This has been a very fruitful evening, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be in your presence. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I want to thank you for this educational opportunity for me and for the people listening on. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you to Mikey Live, and thank you to MTV, because they'll be doing a rebroadcast. So look out for that. And we want to look to Wednesday. Wednesday we will continue to discuss the Constitution, and on Wednesday we're going to be touching on the Bill of Rights, another important discussion to have. So thank you again for joining us, and my name is Neela Etienne. A pleasure serving you this evening. Have a great one. Thank you.